Okay, so in my 9 months since my schizoid diagnosis update video, I started talking about trauma and how that's perhaps influenced some of the issues that I have, but I kind of like didn't really get through all the different thoughts. So yeah, I want to get to that now. I'll just start off with a quick recap. I'll try to make it quick. But so basically, I have schizoid personality disorder. Okay, so I think the trauma, I've got predispositions, blah, blah, blah. I talked about that. The trauma that like pushed me over the edge into becoming schizoid, I think, is the glass child trauma. If you don't know what that is, so I have a disabled sibling, and there's this phenomenon that happens when you have a disabled sibling or a kid who has high needs. It doesn't necessarily have to be disabled, could have high needs for some reason. Okay, what can happen, and what tends to happen a lot, is the parents or the adults around you, they're so focused on this child with the special needs, naturally, obviously, they're so focused on this kid who takes a lot of their time and energy and to deal with and, do the best they can for, that you're over here and like they kind of just see through you like glass, because, this kid, it just takes up so much attention. And you seem fine, so, okay, that kid's fine, I don't need to worry too much about that kid, and they kind of just see through you. Even if you have your own issues, they're not as big as this other kid's issues, so they tend to just, like, see through you. And then they also assume that you're strong enough, even though, like, you're a kid, you haven't developed coping strategies at that age. So they think you're strong, and you learn to act strong because you think, oh, this kid obviously has bigger problems than me, I should try and be strong for the parents, so that the adults around me, don't have to worry about me, they worry about the kid instead. So the adults think you're strong, you think you're strong, but, it's like glass. Glass seems strong, but glass is glass and glass breaks. Yes, I watch Jerry Rig everything sometimes. So yeah, you seem strong, but you can break, and actually fairly easily depending on what's going on. So that's the glass child trauma. I have a disabled sibling. We've actually, like, now that I understand that, I only realized this year that I had any kind of trauma, because the thing about that sort of thing is it's very subtle in a way. Like, when you think about trauma, normally you think of violent or dramatic kinds of events, but this was like a sort of quieter one that did affect me, especially I think emotionally. And but yeah, because it's not so dramatic, it's easy. It's one of those things that's easy to push aside, and but it's constant, and it just keeps building, and it's like your whole life. And I still live with my disabled brother, so I've had that going for a very long time. So this year, since I got the schizoid diagnosis, which made me realize that that was a trauma, things have gotten a bit better because, like, my parents have started to understand better. I understand better, so it's, I've been trying to get better at asking for things when I need things, for example, like fixing my sleep. But yeah, so that's what that was. And I guess also there was a bit of trauma because I'm the oldest kid, so by the time, like, I started off my life pretty normally, and then my first brother, then he was born. Okay, fine, like all eldest kids go through that sort of thing of being the only child, then all of a sudden there's another one and you're like, okay, fine. But then having the third child come along, and I don't really know what happened, but because, like, I was only about 3 years old, but I would have had a sense that this is what normal life is like. Then all of a sudden he comes along and he has his first seizure, or they first notice issues, and as far as I know, I think we probably got dropped off at the grandparents' place or whatever, and then, my parents go off to hospital, and there was all kinds of whatever. So I think there would have been that initial, like, what on earth is going on, and then from there the glass child stuff that kicks in and just keeps going. And yeah, so I think that's the thing that pushed me to become schizoid, along with some of the other environmental and genetic factors. That's summary. I've talked about it more in detail elsewhere. Okay, so what am I moving on to? I started talking about how, like, having been depressed so much could be causing some of the derealization, but I think actually when I was thinking about it later, I think it's more just that triggers that. So, because, I've been getting depressed for a long time, and then, Yeah, like the derealization really kicked in a lot earlier, like earlier in this year. I was having a lot of issues with that. But I don't think like the depression necessarily causes that. It probably just triggers that because when I was going through a lot of depression, and especially earlier this year, struggling a lot with it, I was just having this weird break with reality. Like I could still knew everything was real, but yeah, it was just this weird feeling like yeah, not being connected to stuff and sort of watching myself and like it's hard to explain, and I think the way that I experience derealization is a bit different to what's described on the internet, so I don't know if I have a milder form of it or what's going on. But yeah, I started talking about how depression might trigger that, but I think that's not, oh sorry, so I talked about it as if it caused it, but I think it's more of a trigger for it, if that makes sense. But yeah, no, I think I've been getting depressed for a long time, and I think, like, I originally, like, the first time I had a suicidal thought, I might have actually been 13, which, wow, when I was watching someone talk about glass child trauma and explaining it, she mentioned how she was feeling suicidal when she was 14, and I was sitting there going, gee, that's early, like, poor thing, blah, blah, but a few months later I realized, oh shit, I actually had my thoughts around that time as well. I just didn't know what it was, because I'm old enough to have grown up before like mental health awareness was really a thing, so I didn't even know I was depressed back then. It's only in hindsight I'm like, oh my god. Yeah, I didn't really get diagnosed until after I left school. Anyway, so that covers that. Okay, what I really didn't get into in that thing was dissociation, more generally, but I think in terms of like identity issues, because so like when you look at dissociation, they think it's caused by trauma. And like for a long time I didn't even admit that I had dissociation issues, because when I read that I'm like, oh, I don't have any traumas. But now I realize I do. It's just they've been less obvious. And so now I've had to look at all that again. But I think what's interesting is I'm not convinced that the glass child trauma actually caused the dissociation. I suppose there's some element that it could have, because, you know, you're trying to be strong for your parents and, you know, denying your own needs and stuff because you know the other kid needs things more. Maybe that's caused some of that, like, suppressing myself stuff kind of early. I'm not really sure, but in terms of when I first noticed like problems with my sense of self, I don't know when that started, because I remember as far back as like primary school, maybe my first year or so of primary school, I remember having some strange feelings going on there. But definitely by the time I got to high school, I was much more aware of like the different perspectives my brain was taking, and I didn't really know what to think of it at the time. But yeah, I think I was writing fiction at the time, and it very quickly turned into that kind of dissociative identity kind of vibe, even though I didn't really know what it was at that time, and I had never really been into split personality fiction at the time, so I don't know where I even got the idea. It's just, yeah, a bit strange. But so like what kind of trauma could have caused my brain to do that, to like compartmentalize the pieces of myself? That's what I've been asking myself and like talking to my psychologist about as well, because I think if I can figure out what possible trauma it could have been, then maybe I can better accept that yes, it is dissociation. As I've mentioned before, I've sort of wondered whether that kind of thing is actually something related to schizoid. Like schizoid is considered, depending on who you ask, is sort of on the mild end of the schizophrenia spectrum, and so sometimes I've wondered, am I having a psychosis or like a mild psychosis that is making me think I've got different parts of me, or what else? Am I just like overthinking because I'm noticing certain things about how I behave and how I think and how I experience the world? Am I just overthinking it and then it's turning into this somehow? Or maybe I overthought it in the past and then it's become its own thing. I don't know. And then the other one, so schizoids can be very fantasy prone, and so yeah, I've wondered if something to do with that has gone wrong, perhaps to do like, you know, with that sort of schizophrenia psychosis. Maybe it's done something weird and yeah, resulted in that. Those are some of the ideas, but none of them has been particularly convincing, because when I look at it, there's not really a lot of evidence for that mechanism, I feel. And then when I look at things in my head, there does seem to be a level of logic that I don't feel fits the whole like psychosis thing. Not that I know a whole lot about psychosis, I should probably do a bit more research on it. So yeah, dissociation seems likely, but what is the trauma that did it? And I mean, the glass child thing could have done a little bit, but I don't know. So thinking about other factors in my life, I've grown up in a very conservative Catholic background. Like, you know, obviously on my mum's side, they're all in Japan, so I didn't have a huge connection to Shinto. Although I guess on the Japanese side of things, like Japan is a very repressed society, and so I may have picked up some of that and, you know, like pushed down pieces of myself because you have to present a particular way, and so there's a mismatch between how I present and how I actually feel inside, and then somehow those pieces of me have become split. Yeah, that's the only thing I can think on the Japanese side, but I think because I grew up in Australia with my Australian family, yeah, the conservative Catholic thing, I wonder about that, and there's two factors. One, because I'm female and had a lot of more male interests. I mean, I'm good at maths, so, you know, maths tends to be associated with the more male style of thinking. And also, when I was a lot younger, I actually did want to be a boy, probably for the wrong reasons, I don't know, but I just, like, being female has never really sat naturally with me, at least in sort of, like, in terms of femininity. I'm not very feminine. I only really started wearing dresses of my own free will once I got into goth, and so you know, I've got a whole wardrobe of stuff there now, but thankfully most of it I got for free, so yay. But, you know, most of the time I would still prefer to dress more boyish, and lately, because my hair's been short and if I'm wearing a mask, sometimes people get a bit confused and have thought I was a dude until I, like, opened my mouth and spoke and they could hear my voice. Anyway, and, like, that's kind of fun for me, is, like, having people get confused about... Yeah, anyway, I like messing with people. But yeah, so, like, I had a lot of boyish interests. You know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, way more fun than Barbie. Yeah, but being from a conservative family, I was constantly being told to be more ladylike, and, you know, I went to a conservative Catholic girls' school, so, yeah, and I just didn't really connect with the other girls in my class and so on. Like, yeah, everyone had these interests that I just didn't care about. So there was a bit of that, is like, you know, I've got more male interests, but I'm being pushed to be more feminine. My grandma once got me this dark pink dress, and it was uncomfortable, like, physically. The material and all that was terrible, but also, like, wearing it. She made me wear it at a Christmas party one time, and it was just like, this is not me. This is definitely not me. But I was having to, you know, put on this dress when it didn't sit well with me. At least if it's black, that has some aspect of the darker part of me, okay? So I can I can look feminine, but I can still express that, so it's less of an issue, but yeah. So yeah, I think that mismatch in terms of gender expectations, I suppose if I'd grown up today, I probably would have been told by people outside that I'm non-binary or something, or trans or whatever. But back then, no. And I grew up in that era where being gender non-conforming was fine, and you didn't have to be, like, you know, you could be a boyish girl. Anyway, that gender's a whole other topic. But so that's one thing from a conservative family, being expected to play a particular role that didn't sit well with me, that may have had some issue there. And then also on the Catholic side of things, oh my God, having to go to school and, you know, doing the whole religious thing, that just didn't sit well with me. And then there's things about, like, church as well. Like, there was a period of time where I knew all the words to church and probably put the priest off a bit, because we used to sit up the front and I'd be, like, mouthing along the words in church, and then found out that girls can't be priests. But can you imagine me as a priest? That's a funny thing to think about now, because yeah, becoming an atheist was a logical thing, but not what I expected at the time. But yeah, so, like, Catholicism has its own things where, I mean, like, they're constantly telling you, you know, you're a sinner, blah, blah, blah. And I remember going to like my first confession, and we called it reconciliation, and then you're supposed to tell the priest like what sins you've had. And at the time I was like, I didn't think I had any, like, so I just made up some stuff to tell the priest, because I was like, I've got to tell him something, right? Yeah, so I don't really know though if, because like I don't remember having a lot of pressure from the Catholic side of things, except like going to the Catholic school, having to go to church all the time. And yeah, once I became an atheist, maybe that was a bit jarring, but it's been such a long time since I've even thought about religion now that I mention it. But I just wonder if that's a factor, like the religious upbringing, the conservative upbringing, and maybe also the Japanese cultural thing is like, you have to really present a particular image, but on the inside there's all kinds of other things going on in my head. I remember sitting on church as well, like once my brain was starting to do these darker things, imagining things in church, like in every little shadow, I was just imagining stuff, not hallucinating. I knew it wasn't real and it wasn't vivid, it was just me imagining stuff, probably partly out of boredom. But yeah, I used to like be more involved in church. I used to do readings in my cute little flowery dress, but that got a lot harder once I became an atheist, and there was a lot of pressure also from my family to keep going to church. And so my other brother, the one who's not disabled, he was happy to go to church, and I was starting to not want to go. And then there was a point where I stopped going, and my parents actually bought my brother like church clothes, like a fancy jumper and stuff, as if that would make me want to go to church. I don't know. It was kind of a weird thing to do and kind of a shitty thing to do, but atheism in my family wasn't really accepted at the time. My grandmother was very concerned when she found out I was an atheist, and it's kind of her fault that I even realized atheism was a thing, because she gave me a book. It was back then it was called Northern Lights, but I think when they turned it into a movie they called it The Golden Compass instead. And because I used to read a lot, and especially when I was sick, I'd go to their place and they'd give me a book to read, and that's the one they gave me. But then, yeah, I think she and my grandpa and my parents were talking in another room one day, and I happened to walk in just as my grandma was saying something like, oh, I shouldn't have given her that book, it was written by an atheist. And I was like, what's an atheist? And they said, someone who doesn't believe in God. And then I'm like, oh, that's possible. And that's when I became an atheist, because everything just made sense. Yeah, anyway, so she didn't want me to become an atheist. She kind of accidentally helped me get there. I probably would have got there eventually anyway, but yeah. So I remember one time, like, there were a lot of times, like at family gatherings, she'd sort of quietly pull me aside and tell me I was doomed. Like, my grandma actually told me I was doomed, which I haven't really told people in the family that happened. But we also used to go to like art galleries a lot. I used to spend a lot of time with my grandma. And I'm talking about my Aussie grandma. My Japanese grandma died a long time ago, like while I was in primary school. Anyway, so yeah, I used to hang out with my grandma a lot. We went to art things. I used to go to the art gallery with her. She also took me to see, I think, Finding Nemo, because she wanted to see the movie but didn't want to be that one random old person who isn't taking a kid there, so I was her excuse to see the movie. But there was this one time she took me to, I think is it St. Mary's Cathedral in the city, and she went into confession and I was just sitting in the church, like just sitting around waiting for her. And I think the priest must have said something to her at that point, because after that, she stopped telling me I was doomed and instead said, as long as I was a good person, I'd still go to heaven. Which I don't believe in heaven, and even if I did, I think... Anyway, so I wonder if that affected me as well, having to pretend to be religious for a while, even though I wasn't. And I know in school as well, a lot of people probably thought I was religious because I was quiet in school. I was much more overtly schizoid and, trying to be the good student. I was the high achiever. A lot of the teachers liked me, but they had no idea what was going on in my head. During high school is also when I finally had more reliable access to the internet, so I was doing RPGs. It was a sort of a weird sort of RPG. It was more like we didn't have particular rules like, D&D or whatever. It was just collaborative story writing, and I very much had a double life at that time. I'd go to school, pretend to be the good student, come home, write a bunch of violent stuff with some American friends. Long story how I got into that. So I had a double life for a long time in that way. I don't know, that's why I think, like, you know, is there a fictional component? But where did I even get some of these ideas? Because it's only later that I started to come across split personality fiction and things like, you know, the conflict of characters like Kenichi Joji and Digimon, or half the characters in Yu-Gi-Oh! That stuff was later, like I had already been into that stuff. I guess like maybe like Animorphs, there was some mind control stuff going in there, but like I was just kept being drawn to these things because it was so relatable. And I don't know, that may have influenced like some of the weird things going on in my brain, but yeah, what bothers me is like instead of staying fiction, like there's things that leaked out into my real life, and even like back then, before I was more open about it and started dressing goth and like changing that appearance to match the things that were going on in my head and trying to appease that, trying to negotiate with myself, like just feels crazy. Anyway, yeah, before all that, where was I going with things? Oh yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that like, you know, I was sensible enough not to let anyone see that these things were happening with me, but yeah, a lot of things were happening privately. But this has been going on for a while, and Mum's going to come back any minute, and we're going to go to lunch today. Oh, okay, so just quickly to wrap up, like, you know, there's more thoughts I need to talk about in terms of dissociation, the identity issues, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, no, today, weird thing, I actually slept through to 8. Like, I went to bed around midnight and I woke up at 8, and I didn't wake up at that, like, you know, 5:30, 6 o'clock that I usually wake up, go to the bathroom, come back to bed. And so at 8, when I woke up, I thought, should I stay in bed? But eventually I just got up, and I've already watered all my plants. I've been for a walk with Hope. I don't know, it's weird actually getting a decent amount of sleep. And but I also had a dream about my ex, and my ex is like one of the only people who's had any real interaction with the other part of me. So I don't know, I'm a little bit like today. But yeah, that's why I had time to make this video, because I'm awake early enough and Mum's at the gym and no one's here, Mikey's already gone. So, wow, but I'm concerned that tomorrow I won't wake up like this and I'll be back to having no energy, because when I have a good day, I tend to have a shit day the next day. So I'm a bit nervous about that, but hopefully tomorrow will be okay. That's just another interesting thing. Anyway, yeah. One of the other reasons I made myself get up early is because I knew we were going to lunch, and I thought if I wake up earlier, then I can have breakfast earlier, then I'll get hungrier earlier, then I can eat more because we're going to this like dumpling place and it's really tasty. Anyway, so today is actually Friday. I actually filmed the 9 months SPD video yesterday, but you know, this video won't go up for a few days because I've got a few other videos to post. So wow, I'm actually ahead of schedule with YouTube for a change, instead of like desperately scrounging for things to post. Well done me. Yeah. What day will this go up? Probably on Sunday. So I did say maybe I would live stream on Monday, but I think I need that day for filming, so maybe the following Monday I'll live stream. Yeah, and so keep an eye on my community tab, I guess, because that's where I'll announce things like that. And I think I will put up that form again to yeah, let people ask questions. Anyway, so that's some thoughts on trauma. To summarize, I think glass child trauma definitely made me go over the edge into schizoid personality disorder. But as for dissociation, I'm not really sure like where that comes from, and if it's a trauma thing, then I think it might have to do with a conservative upbringing, even though like nothing violent happened. It was maybe just that pressure, and I guess also being a good student. That pressure of being a good student could have done a bit or exacerbated a bit, because, you know, once it was evident that I was, you know, gifted, for all my life has turned out, gifted, yeah, there was just this constant expectation for me to keep doing well, and I put a lot of pressure on myself as well as a result, and yeah, just having to keep that up. And oh god, there's so much, like trying to think about my life now that I realize how much was screwed up. It's just a weird thing to think about it as an adult, and like after so many years to finally start figuring out these things. yeah, it's a weird thing that I'm going through. But I guess YouTube is going through it with me in some way because here is where I'm saying most of the stuff. So, yeah.